Hello, welcome. My name is Robert Davis, and this channel is Claystone Studies. And in this video, I'd like to conduct an investigation in epistemology, which in philosophy is a branch of philosophy concerned with the study of knowledge. So there's an important question in epistemology. This question is, how is knowledge possible? How is knowledge possible? So I'd like to investigate the answer to this question with you. I have my ideas, but I believe that by engaging in an inquiry, in an investigation, in the space, in the context of this video, good fruits can arise, and I'd like to share the investigation with you. So the question we're looking at is, how is knowledge possible? So this question might arise because you might think, okay, so we're human beings, we have a brain, we have a mind, we're in the world, and then we're able to have knowledge of the world. We're able to do things. The fact that we have knowledge of the world is evidenced by the fact that we're able to conduct complex and successful activities that depend on that knowledge. For example, going to the moon, or building rockets, building complex technologies. All these things demonstrate that we do have access to knowledge. So you might think, well, of course, you're just covering basic facts, but it's important to go slowly and set the stones down carefully so we can proceed steadily, because soon we'll go deeper into the question. So, how is knowledge possible? We do have knowledge, and how does that work? Knowledge seems to be an activity of the mind, and is that the same as the brain's contact with the world? For example, there's the five senses and there's imagination. So when our sense of sight contacts an object, the object is being received by our eyes, and then the data from the other four senses is combined together in a coherent and organized way. And this experience in a unified way arises in the mind, and then our intelligence processes this experience. For example, we can have the experience of seeing a tree, and then our intelligence can engage in some thinking by having the thought, well, that tree is a maple tree, part of the class of trees called maple trees. So that thought involves something beyond just the immediate experience of the senses and that which combines the senses into a unified experience. So then suppose we stick with this example of the tree. We encounter the tree, our sense of sight contacts it. Then we hear some birds in the sky, and all of this gets combined into a nice coherent experience into our minds. So we're looking at the tree, we're listening to the birds, and then suppose we have a bit of a higher level thought. We think, well, this tree signifies beauty in a certain way. Look at its proportionality, its color, the way it interacts with the background of the blue sky. This is a scene of beauty. Now, what is beauty? Now, we might think, well, beauty involves some kind of proportionality, some kind of maybe that magical element of charm that's hard to put words on, but ultimately could be described, presumably. A sense of unity. So these concepts are distinct from what the senses are doing. So they're more related to higher levels of thought, associated with what we might call the intellect, as opposed to the part of our mind that receives data from the senses and interprets the bare bones experience, as in, okay, tree on ground, sky in background, in the state of Texas, in North America. So as opposed from those bare bones facts that our senses signify to us, there's some higher level thinking too about the beauty of the tree. What is the nature of beauty? And then we might reason, well, is the universe beautiful? Is the universe characterized by order or harmony? So then we would reference other sense experiences we have about the universe and then make inferences using a deeper part of our intelligence. So how is the higher level knowledge possible? I suppose we can simply explain all of the sense experiences by virtue of the biological operation of the senses and the brain contacting the world. But isn't it said in some circles of philosophy that knowledge is the unity between the subject and the object? For example, in Aristotle, it is said that knowledge is the unity between the subject and the object. So how does that fit into this picture? Is the unity between the subject and the object, is that present when our senses contact the tree? In a way, I suppose, when our eyes meet the tree, there's probably some kind of unity there. After all, our eyes aren't engaging with something else, so there's some kind of contact. So I suppose it is reasonable to say that there's some degree, some kind of unity that occurs even in the sense perception when our eyes meet the tree. Okay. Now, what comes to mind is, for example, if suppose two people are in a romantic relationship, so their eyes meet. Beyond just the sense experience, there's also a deeper unity, a unity of soul also. How do we categorize that? That seems to be beyond or distinct from just the sense experience of the data of the other person's body meeting the eye. But what is the nature of the unity or the deeper encounter we have with the other person? How do we categorize that? Okay, so we've offered a brief treatment, or we've engaged in an inquiry together. In your imagined presence, dear viewer, there's been an inquiry about some elements of knowledge. Let's leave that where it is. We can return to it, and let's consider for a moment some first principles in metaphysics. So, in my understanding, all of reality can be traced to the One, which may be regarded as the cosmic singularity, a substance without parts and without matter either, of the nature of pure truth and pure life. The One, it was discussed in the tradition of Plotinus. The One, Plato and Aristotle, roughly referred to the One. Plato called it the good. Aristotle, I believe, he referred to it as the prime mover in his metaphysics. And it seems as if he referred to it as the One in another context, perhaps. It is said that he gave a lecture once and talked about the One in that lecture, and then the people were displeased for some reason. And then in the East, also in India, there's the concept of Brahman. In the Vedanta philosophy, there's the notion of Advaita. Dvaita means two. Advaita means not two. The Sanskrit word Advaita. So in the Indian philosophy as well, the ancient Indian philosophy, reality is said to begin from the Advaita, from the One, basically. So that's the premise I'll be working with here. So it has its corroborations in terms of other speculations that have occurred in both East and West. even in the Apocrypha, in the Christian tradition, I believe in one of the texts, it is said that when Jesus speaks to John, Jesus refers to the One. And I'm paraphrasing, but I believe it says that Jesus says, all things begin from the One. So even in the Christian tradition, not in the Gospels, maybe we can infer that idea in the Gospels, but directly in one of the apocryphal texts, I'm not sure which one it is, Jesus says that all things begin from the One. So in many different places, we might even refer to ancient Chinese philosophy as pointing to this idea, perhaps the Tao. The Tao, all things relating to the Tao being the transcendent, the mysterious source, full of unity. That seems to point to the idea of the One. The One, I would say, what the number one in mathematics points to, which originates all things. Not the same as a deity or a god, which has a mind and perhaps can have a will or change. This is like the number one in mathematics. It's wonderfully precise because we can be confident that it's not going to change. And so there's an added degree of scientific precision when we're thinking about the first cause, the creative principle at the source of all reality. So I believe it's wonderfully refreshing when someone might have been depressed, thinking about traditions where it's never quite sure how the creator is going to be disposed toward you. If you're on the right side or the wrong side, part of the right group or the wrong group, in danger of punishment. So with the One, I would offer it's the correct view. It's thinking about it with careful reason, and all things reduced to a substance which is simple in nature without parts. So this seems to be satisfactory to the scientific criterion. So on the premise that all things logically proceed from the One, I don't believe that they temporally proceed from the One. It's not as if at one point in time the cosmic plurality emerged from the One, just as if never was it the case that all of the numbers at one point in time emerged from the number One. In precisely the same way, I believe it's exactly the same with the cosmic plurality and the cosmic singularity. I think when we think about the numbers actually map on to the cosmic singularity and the cosmic plurality when we ask ourselves the question, what are the nature of the numbers ultimately in themselves, the ultimate essence of the numbers? I think we would find that they trace to that which is ultimate, the cosmic singularity, the cosmic plurality. And so the cosmic plurality logically traces to the One, just as the number 5, 6, 7, and so forth logically trace to the One, not emerging in time. It's not as if the number 5, 6, and 7 at one time didn't exist, but they logically trace to the number One. So if that's the case, then the number One, the nature of the number One, will be instantiated in a certain way among all the rest of the cosmic plurality. Now, let's work with the premise that the cosmic singularity in itself is perfectly intelligible, meaning it's not in itself, it's not mysterious or something that cannot in potentia be understood. Now that's different from saying that any node or finite intelligence or soul can actually understand it. I would say that would be impossible since we're speaking of the ultimate reality. But in itself, absolutely speaking, let's work with the premise that the cosmic singularity is intelligible in itself. It can be at least partially understood. And in itself, it is perfectly intelligible. It is of the nature of ultimate logical truth. Just as the number One in mathematics must be the nature of ultimate mathematical truth, because the number one, through multiplication, produces all the other numbers. So any intelligibility in any of the other numbers must be perfectly present in the number one, totally present in the number one. So if we apply that dynamic, or if we suppose that that dynamic exists with the cosmic singularity and the cosmic plurality, or the cosmic plurality is all this, the entire universe, then the perfect logical truth aspect of the number one would be distributed, would be present with all of the rest of the cosmic plurality. One helpful way to envision this, I believe, is think of an inverted triangle where you're working with a matrix of just ones, just ones. So at the bottom of the inverted triangle is just the number one, and then one level up is just two number ones. Then one level up is three number ones. Then one level up is four, and it's a triangle. Suppose it just proceeds infinitely. So I think this is a helpful symbol to think about what we're dealing with here. The bottom of the inverted triangle may represent the cosmic singularity, and then each layer up would represent more complex aspects, more complex layers of the cosmic plurality, of the field of existence. And so the intelligibility of the number one would also permeate, would be present with all of the other layers of that inverted triangle. And now we go back to the original question of the video, the original theme, the inquiry. How is knowledge possible? So the idea here, if we apply our most recent contemplation about the cosmic singularity and its intelligibility to our original reflection about knowledge, sense knowledge, and the different kinds of knowledge that go on in an everyday experience, then I believe it would be reasonable to come to this kind of reflection or conclusion, namely that when we take a subject in the world, and then when we consider an object that is being perceived by that subject, and note that that object could also be a subject, and the original subject could be an object for that subject. But let's suppose that there's a person here looking at the tree, so subject and object. Then that subject and object could be, say, for example, on layer 56 of the symbolic inverted triangle. Now, both the subject and the object partake of the intelligibility, the absolute intelligibility, the susceptibility to be understood. They partake of that intelligibility which traces to the cosmic singularity. And so, since it is the cosmic singularity that through a logical process of multiplication manifests as the subject and as the object, that knowledge is possible. Because there's a common medium. Both the subject partakes of truth, potentially, and then both the object partakes of truth, potentially, roughly speaking. And then knowledge happens when there's an activation of the knowledge in the subject. That's a rough sketch. And so there's also a third thing. I think that's like a light bulb insight that kind of offers a compelling solution to the original inquiry. There's a third thing. Beside the subject and the object, there's the ground, the substratum, the medium, which connects the subject and the object, and which also proceeds from that bottom point of the inverted triangle, the cosmic singularity. That medium. So both the medium, the subject, and the object all proceed from the one, and the one is pure logical truth, pure intelligibility. And so on this thesis, on this view, that is how knowledge is possible, because there's a kind of activation in the intelligence of the subject of a connectivity that is always in potentiality. Now, I still don't quite understand it, but I believe I'm getting close. I believe it's getting to somewhere good. I think it's getting to somewhere insightful. Now, we can also think, I believe, that truth is a sphere. Truth is a sphere. So let's update the image of the inverted triangle, and let's think about a sphere. So if we think about truth as a sphere, and in this case, the sphere would represent the cosmic totality. So in my understanding, just as any sphere has both a center point and an outer surface area at the same time, so too, if we grant the premise of a cosmic plurality, then at the same time, there must be, logically speaking, a cosmic singularity, a cosmic one, and also a cosmic totality. Those three concepts go together: singularity, plurality, totality. So if the sphere, the geometric sphere that we're visualizing, represents the cosmic totality, and then the cosmic totality also represents absolute truth, then that could be another way to think about how knowledge is possible, because both the subject and the object are parts within the cosmic totality. They are parts within the cosmic totality. And the medium also, the medium which connects the subject and the object, is also part of the cosmic totality. And since the fabric, the nature of the cosmic totality, is pure logical truth, that would indicate how knowledge is possible. Now, in some spiritual traditions, it's said that knowledge is possible because the subject is of the nature of knowledge. Now, I think we can see that that would be a misunderstanding, because the condition, the origin of knowledge, is something independent of both the subject and the object. But the pure common objective cosmic totality from which the subject and the object logically emanate. And again, if we think about spiritual traditions and common practices involved in spirituality, perhaps more even in modern spirituality, there's the notion of conducting self-inquiry to reach the absolute knowledge. So self-inquiry, if we stick with the image of the sphere, and the subject and the object are just basically every possible thing in the universe being a certain part within that sphere, then the process of conducting self-inquiry would be the process of a certain node within the sphere activating its intelligence in such a way that it embarks on the activity of understanding its connection, the way it traces to the cosmic singularity. Think about going to the center point of that sphere. That would be the process of self-inquiry, where the node or the soul inquires into the nature of the relation between itself and the cosmic singularity. And because every substance, and thus every soul, traces to the cosmic singularity, just as the number one is the source of all numbers, eventually, when the soul conducts that self-inquiry rightly, then we can see that the soul would approach the center of that sphere. It would approach the cosmic singularity. Now, in my understanding, the cosmic singularity, or the journey to it, is best understood as a fractal journey, an unending journey. Otherwise, reality would not contain an infinity, and thus reality, would eventually be limited. But that's not the case. I think we should begin from the premise that reality is infinite, and especially the absolute divinity is ultimately always transcendent. So it would be a fractal journey into the cosmic singularity. Now, in spiritual traditions, I think it might be relevant. I heard once that it was said that the Indian sage Papaji, who taught in Lucknow, also said once that the journey is infinite. The journey of the soul is infinite. It never ends. So that would seem to be an instance of testimony from someone who had profound direct spiritual experience, which I do not. I'm operating from intuition and reason. I'm kind of in line with these truths, but I don't have the direct spiritual experience that Papaji presumably had. So he offered the testimony that it's infinite, that reality is, that the journey never ends. So that's a certain testimony that supports my view that the journey to the cosmic singularity is best characterized as a fractal journey that never ends. But here's also another insight that's missed by a lot of spiritual traditions, modern spiritual traditions associated with self-inquiry. So recall again to your mind the image of the cosmic sphere in which all things exist as parts. Now remember again, we noted that self-inquiry could be represented as one of the nodes, which would be a soul, investigating its relation between itself and the cosmic singularity, and that journey towards the cosmic singularity would be the process of self-inquiry, associated with more and more joy, unity, and life as one approaches the cosmic singularity. But here's an insight I'd like to share. It's often missed in modern studies of self-inquiry, modern traditions of self-inquiry, that just as potent, just as powerful is an inquiry into the object. Because any object too is also a part in the cosmic totality, and it too has a trace. It too can be traced to the cosmic singularity. So it clearly emerges that if you know clearly the nature of any object and trace how it goes to the cosmic singularity, that would be an equivalent process, basically. You're just working with what is experienced to be the object and not the subject. So the subject may be called self-inquiry. Looking at the object may be regarded as, scientific investigation, which is valid. Oftentimes it's falsely dismissed in spiritual circles. So scientific investigation, knowing the truth of something, knowing the truth of the universe, knowing the truth of some object. So see how knowledge of the world is equally fruitful for the spiritual search. All objects, all souls are parts in the cosmic totality. So ultimately we will see that, and I'm sharing with you now the truth, I believe, that seeing these things in terms of the third person is the most accurate way. We can get into confusion and misunderstanding if we think about the subject and the object and we take too seriously the idea that we are the subject and those things are the object. Actually, in the more fundamental and accurate perspective of the third person, both we ourselves and the objects are things, are substances within the cosmic totality. So we are an object for that subject. If we take the language of subject and object too seriously, we can get into a kind of radical selfishness inadvertently, where we interpret everything in regard to the so-called subject, which we falsely take to be absolute. The absolute subject is actually the cosmic one, which is not a subject because it's not relative to an object, but it is the middle ground between the subject and the object. But any instance of a subject is only relative. It can also be viewed as an object to another perceiver in the field of existence who might take itself to be a subject and us to be an object. So in the spiritual life, in the spiritual search, especially for all of those familiar and conversant with traditions of self-inquiry, self-knowledge, the insight I wish to share with you that is emerging naturally from this inquiry into the question, how is knowledge possible, is that investigation into objects is an equally powerful spiritual method. You might notice how common it is for the idea of dismissing objects and in favor of inquiring who sees them, who thinks about them. But actually what's going on is, let's look at that in the third person. The question who sees it, who thinks about it, is actually an investigation into the essence of what the nature of the perceiving soul is. Now, since both the object and the subject emerge from the cosmic singularity, this is also an investigation into a certain object in the cosmic totality. It's not an investigation into the subject. Remember, the ultimate subject is just the one, which is not a subject. It is the common middle ground. So self-inquiry is, when we think about self-inquiry using the first person and avoid the ambiguous use of the first and second persons, which are not necessary to describe reality, we can describe reality in an exhaustive and comprehensive way using just the third person. Notice how the third person is used in legal contexts and formal contexts. It's because we intuitively use the third person when we're trying to assume a broad-minded and universal point of view. That corroborates my view that in spirituality, it is most beneficial to use the third person because that approximates the perspective or the disposition of universality. Notice too, when you're spiritually hungry, you really don't want to use the first person because it signifies the individuality, the personality. You want to go beyond that. You want to think about the universal, the transcendent, the cosmic. So I'm sure many of you have experienced, the anguish of using the word self to describe the ultimate reality. It's a painful experience because the word self is painfully ambiguous between the individuality and it's supposed to mean also the cosmic singularity. But it's not a good word because the cosmic singularity is not a self of a being, but simply a logical ultimate datum, a quantum, the number one. We wouldn't say the number one is a self. It would be too imprecise, too clumsy of a word. So the word self is not a good word, I would offer to you. Not a good word to describe the ultimate spiritual reality. The number one is the number one. It's immediately obvious, self-evident. The number one is precise and exact, and it's immediately obvious that it's a fitting term to describe the ultimate kernel of reality, the nucleus, the cosmic singularity, the one. And so within the cosmic totality, investigations into objects are equally as powerful as the practice of self-inquiry is. This frees you, this liberates your spiritual life. If you've been practicing the tradition of self-inquiry, thinking that the only fruitful road is investigating within the subject, because you were always thinking, well, I have to leave behind the world if I want to actually be serious about my spiritual investigations. Now I'm saying to you, no, conduct your investigations into the universe. This is equally a road to the cosmic singularity. And it should be so. Are we going to say that all of our fellow physicists, chemists, biologists are just languishing in Maya, languishing in illusion? That's not compelling. That doesn't make sense. When they're investigating reality, the universe with heart and soul, they're getting closer to the truth. So this view of seeing all things within the cosmic totality explains why. It's because all things exist as parts within the cosmic totality. And when most accurately understood with the third person, when we see reality in terms of the third person, both all souls and all substances whatsoever are parts within the cosmic totality, thus tracing the path of the soul to the cosmic singularity and the path of any other substance. A tree also connects to the cosmic singularity, a star, a planet, a mountain, every other individual, a galaxy, all substances trace to the cosmic singularity. And so I believe this is liberating information because it means your spiritual journey never ends. There's a natural rhythm between interiority and exteriority. If you're under the usual misunderstanding that goes along with the traditions of self-inquiry, that it's only about the aham vritti, it's only about inquiring into the I, then whenever your consciousness naturally moved towards the exteriority element of the dialectic, whenever your consciousness moved towards the world, you thought, okay, now I'm not doing the spiritual activity, at least not in the most intense way, because I have to go back to see who the witness is in order to really get back on the path of direct observation and knowledge. I'm saying, and I'm sure it's clear to you now, that when your consciousness naturally transitions to the world, you can use those experiences and move towards the cosmic singularity in an as efficient and robust and dynamic a way as possible. In a way, you might even have an advantage conducting your investigation into the cosmic singularity, investigating the universe, because the universe is common to all beings, whereas it's not as clear. It's true that the investigation inward goes along a universal road and is understood rightly, at least at some point, but it's more obvious and immediately clear how the investigation into the universe is an investigation into a domain of common knowledge. So you're always grounded in common objective measures, and so it's very stabilizing. So that's another breath of fresh air for you, because if you interpreted the path of spirituality with the misunderstanding that it is only about going and investigating the nature of the I, or the I am, or the perceiving consciousness, it's very easy to become destabilized, because you're only working in the intelligible space of consciousness, and you have to go through your own personal psychology, which contains a lot of just your individuality, at least to begin with. And so it's not so easy to be grounded. So now you can investigate the mountain, the river, the earth. And when you do so, when you make the effort to understand, which is an act of self-sacrifice, because the effort to know an object is the effort to connect with the object, and that itself is a moment of transcending the individuality. When you go on the path of understanding the universe, you conform in ever so slight of a degree, a little bit of a degree or more of a degree, depending on the robustness, the effort, and the heartfulness with which you do it. But you conform to the cosmic singularity little by little. Okay, so let's round out our reflections, our investigation, our inquiry. So we begin with the question, how is knowledge possible? Then we recalled a familiar experience of looking at a tree. We noted that there are the five senses. The five senses, or at least the sense of sight, let's say, contact the tree. And then the experience of the tree is combined spontaneously with the data of the other senses into a coherent experience in our mind. And then there's also a higher level kind of intelligent activity whereby we might categorize the tree into other categories in our understanding. We might reason about even higher archetypes beauty. What is beauty? How does this tree demonstrate beauty? What is the nature of beauty? And then we noted the nature of knowledge going on there. There's one level of knowledge, just the sense activity, and then the immediate sense experience, and then a higher level of knowledge. We noted the kind of knowledge that goes on when in a romantic relationship, when two people connect with each other deeply. There's something there beyond just the sense experience of seeing the other individual body. Then we moved to contemplate the nature of the cosmic singularity and how the cosmic singularity logically produces all of the cosmic plurality, not in a moment in time, but simply, logically speaking, it grounds it, all things trace to the cosmic singularity. We noted that the intelligibility, the pure logical truthness of the one, of the cosmic singularity, would be present in all instances of cosmic plurality in the same way as the nature or the intelligibility of the number one would be present with all other numbers, because all other numbers are a result of the number one being multiplied in a certain way. Then I suggested that truth can be understood as I suggested that we think about an inverted triangle, and that might be the first way to get to an answer about how knowledge is possible. Any two instances of things that contact each other, which correspond to something when we say knowledge is going on. So when a subject contacts an object, both the subject and the object trace to that bottom point in the cosmic triangle, or the inverted triangle. That was a bit wordy. In other words, whenever there's a subject and an object within the symbol of that inverted triangle, both the subject and the object trace to that bottom point of the inverted triangle, and thus participate in the intelligibility, the truthness of that bottom point of the triangle, and also the connecting medium between the subject and the object also traces to that singularity, that one, the bottom point of the cosmic triangle. And that seems to offer at least a tentative explanation about how knowledge is possible. It's because there's a connectivity between the two. So it's as if there's an already existing connectivity which is merely being actualized in the moment of knowledge. Aristotle speaks about this in the De Anima, book 3, chapter 5. It's a very wonderful part of that book, the De Anima of Aristotle. Aristotle offers an observation that it's not as if the mind at one time knows and another time does not, but the mind is always in a state of actuality. He was talking about kind of the deeper aspect of our mind. And knowledge happens when that perpetually activated nature of the mind manifests in our surface consciousness. This also pertains to the doctrine of recollection that Socrates talked about in the dialogue, the Meno of Plato, the doctrine of recollection, that the process of gaining knowledge is merely recalling what the soul already knows. So in the De Anima, book 3, chapter 5, I would suggest that Aristotle was pointing to that doctrine of recollection by saying that it's not as if the mind, or you can say the soul consciousness, at one time knows and another time doesn't. The soul consciousness is always connected to some degree of actual knowledge, like a substratum of light. And then when the consciousness settles and reaches a state of unity, I would suggest, then at that moment, we call that the moment of understanding. But what is actually going on is the consciousness becomes adequated, becomes adequated to that part of the always active substratum of knowledge. And in that moment, we experience the insight or the knowledge to arise. So going back to the inverted triangle therefore, we can think about how the subject and the object are connected by a connecting medium that is always active in a certain way. And then the subject has the experience of having knowledge when the subject kind of conforms to that always active connectivity in a certain way. When that always active connectivity of intelligibility is actualized in the subject's consciousness, that becomes the experience of knowledge. So that could explain why someone could always exist in a state of rather profound intuition, because their surface consciousness is becoming deeper, and they're merely approximating more and more the kind of always turned on state of their soul consciousness. That's a hypothesis that I offer. Notice I'm just kind of thinking this with you now, but this is the benefit of this kind of dialectic and interchange. Insights can arise. So then, finishing out what we did in our inquiry, then we thought about the sphere. If we transform the 2D inverted triangle into a 3D sphere for the purposes of our contemplation, and think about how any particular part of the universe are parts within the cosmic totality. And we noted how, since all things emanate from that center point of the sphere, that explains in another way how knowledge is possible. Because the center point of the sphere, or biological division, the surface area of the sphere, is producing the always active connectivity between the subject and the object. And remember that the object can be the subject, and that original subject can serve as the object for that other subject. So there's that always turned on connectivity, which is the light of knowledge, we can say. So that's a hypothesis about how knowledge is possible. And remember how we rounded out our inquiry by talking about the implications for spirituality, and particularly in the traditions of self-inquiry. We noted how the journey to tracing the relation between the soul to the cosmic singularity, that center point of the sphere, is best understood as a fractal journey, I would propose to you. That preserves the transcendence of the absolute reality, which is joyful because it means there's always space to improve. We'll never be under the deluded notion that we've attained it. We noted how the Indian sage Papaji also offered his view that the journey of the soul is infinite. So a kind of corroboration to the view offered here. And then we noted critically, in a kind of liberating insight for all those I would offer, for all those on the path of self-inquiry, we noted and we saw how investigations into what seem to be objects, but what are actually equally nodes or substances within the cosmic totality, where we also are such a substance, investigations into objects are also equally fruitful, because every object traces to the cosmic singularity. Notice how you can kind of discern how the use of this language of subject and object is kind of short-sighted. It's much more accurate to use the third person and to say, when this substance either investigates itself as a substance and sees how it traces to the cosmic singularity, or when that substance looks at another substance and sees how it traces to the cosmic singularity. Those are equally fruitful spiritual paths, because in both cases, the intelligence of the soul is participating in knowledge about how all things trace to the cosmic singularity. This is singularity inquiry, which contains both self-inquiry and object inquiry. And note how this wonderfully integrates the activity of the sciences, which, if you misinterpreted the path of self-inquiry, you might have had to rather awkwardly and unpalatably dismiss as just mere Maya. The sciences, the physicists, our fellow physicists, chemists, biologists, all those in the sciences are also proceeding towards the cosmic singularity in their investigations of truth. That could be the only reason why they could feel that it's part of their life's journey and pursuit and fills their heart with contentment when they pursue these sciences, is because they're also proceeding towards the core of reality, the core, the first principle of the field of existence. Okay, so now I'd like to conclude this video. This was an inquiry into the question in epistemology, which means the study of knowledge, how knowledge is possible. So many good fruits arose from this inquiry. I'd like to express my good wishes for you. I offer one-on-one sessions in spiritual coaching, philosophy tutoring, and just a general conversation if you'd like to talk about anything with me. I'm available for that. So the link to booking such sessions will be in the video description below. And also I presently offer a course called the Minimalist Wisdom Text Course. In the course of my spiritual practice and studies, I composed several texts in metaphysics, ethics, epistemology, those kinds of themes. And at some point, I wanted to get a minimalist version of the text, just so I could have an efficient way to refresh my understanding about kind of the essence of what I've come to understand, or what are some of the most important points about metaphysics that are good to remind myself about in order to feel regrounded again and to practice the activity of understanding. And so that text I'm sharing with you in this course, the Minimalist Wisdom Text Course. It's composed of 10 propositions. The course is an organic conversation. So there are 12 videos, and it's an organic conversation where I work through the text with you. I explain it. So I offer that as well. That information is in the video description. And again, I'd like to offer my best wishes for the highest welfare of all those who view this video, and let us proceed in goodwill and harmony. Goodbye.